So excited to have this conversation with my colleague, Joy Stephens. Hi, Joy. How are you?
I am doing well, David. How are you?
I'm doing well, Joy. So I just want to jump right into this
Sure.
because this is an issue that you and I have had great conversations on. So last week, Coca Cola, major American company based in your hometown of Atlanta, issued a memo to its attorneys, and the general counsel Bradley Gayton said, in sum and substance, that if law firms do not increase their population of attorneys of color and specifically Black attorneys, and have a larger percentage of those attorneys working on Coca-Cola's matters, then Coca-Cola is going to withhold some fees as non-refundable, and they may part ways with those law firms. But for me, that's just part of the formula, pun intended, with Coca-Cola. Nobody's talking about creating an inclusive culture at these law firms. So you could do all the hiring you want, but how welcome, how developed and trained are these attorneys going to be at these firms? And I'd love
Mhm.
to hear your thoughts on it.
I love what Coca-Cola is doing. I think it is an example of, we're tired of hearing excuses. We've been hearing for decades now that there just aren't that many engineers, there aren't that many lawyers, there aren't that many doctors, whatever, and they're there. There are schools that graduate nothing but Black engineers, a high level of Black lawyers, and they are out there in the low levels of a lot of different firms. And what is stopping them from being elevated to partner? People that have been there 10, 15 years, but can't make partner, and then they move somewhere else. We talked earlier, like there are a lot of lateral hires in legal entities, but once you get to the upper echelon, it tends to get a little bit more homogeneous. And I think what Coca-Cola is saying is stop it. I don't want to hear that you can't find them and make it work. And you're right, it does push potentially the idea of quotas, which takes us back to the 70s, where you need exactly this number of this and this number of that, et cetera. But at least based on what I've seen with people demanding inclusivity in the places where they work and moving somewhere else if they don't find it, companies that don't have an inviting or an inclusive culture are going to struggle with maintaining those quotas. You hire somebody and they're gone in 6 months because they don't like
Yeah.
it there. So it behooves the company to make sure the environment is good so they don't have to keep running through that cycle of hiring over and over again.
Right, and such an important point. And I'm a former lawyer. I spent over 16 years in executive search placing lawyers, so I understand the lateral market really well. And what I never could wrap my head around was that law firms, particularly large law firms, spend millions of dollars in lateral recruiting budgets to bring in talent, but they spend a fraction on training and development and organizational development and organizational culture.
Mhm.
And when you have junior Black attorneys or other attorneys of color or from underrepresented groups, and they don't see people like them in leadership at those firms, it's hard for them to see a path and to develop a career at these firms. But what I think law firms greatly discount how important representation is, but also they have to come to terms with their own issues, why the numbers are so low of attorneys of color and specifically Black attorneys.
Mhm.
So, what can law firms do? The executive committee, the managing partners, what can they do to start addressing those issues of inclusive culture, of representation, of allyship?
Well, there's an acute answer and then there's a long-term answer. So immediately what you can do is start sharing with the people that you're hiring that you are trying. No one's expecting everything to morph overnight and all of a sudden there's all this diversity at multiple levels in every company. Like we just pulled back a curtain and shablam, everything's there. But I do think that you can have a discussion with people that you're hiring. We are looking to be intentional about improving our diversity numbers. We're looking to, potentially even fast track some people that we bring in that have the background to move up in the company. We're looking to expand, and it's going to take a while, but we want to be accountable for this and hold on to it. That authenticity of, we know we haven't been the best, but we're trying to be better, will read well, especially with your younger generation. And when I say younger generation, millennials are 40. So, you know, the millennials, the Gen Zs out there are well into our workplaces right now, and they're looking for something different. So that's a short-term fix. Like, just be honest with where you are. Long-term, stick with what you just said. If you're really trying to improve diversity numbers and have a more inclusive culture, this is where the rubber meets the road. In a year from now, the person you just hired is going to start making decisions on whether they want to stay or go. What have you done to make that environment the inclusive thing that you said you were trying to build? You know, what training have you had? Like you said, there's not a lot of development. And I want to sidetrack for a second on that. Part of the lack of development that you'll see, not just in the legal industry, but in most industries where you have a majority, let's say straight white male at leadership positions, they've hired and promoted people that they have an affinity for. We all have a bias for people that look like us. They're from our hometown, they're from our alma mater, you know, it's whatever, but they tend to look like us too. And that mentoring, that development happens behind the scenes. Let's go grab a drink, let's go play golf, come over for dinner. And it's not formal, but certain people are getting it because they have the privilege of looking like or reminding a partner of themselves 20 years ago. And that mentorship grows organically. You don't have that same affinity when you are matching someone, say, from Harvard with someone from Duke, you know, or they don't have that on the surface, they don't have that commonality to make them naturally gravitate toward each other, which is why you need a formal mentorship program or apprenticeship even. You know, let some of the people that you're hiring in, let them shadow the partners, let them understand what it takes without fear of replacement. Sometimes that fear can settle in too, where, well, I don't want my firm to be unrecognizable anymore. Well, it might be. It doesn't have to be, but it might be. Yeah.
And I agree. And that whole coming to terms with where we are, who we are. You know, I practiced law for several years. I'm a proud member of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee of the New York City Bar Association. And I still see these instances where Black attorneys are hired by law firms. And then there's this expectation that they go to every lunch pre-COVID and conference on diversity and inclusion representing the firm while their white colleagues are taking clients to lunch and dinner and doing business development and professional development. And I just never understood why firms aren't requiring white attorneys, men and women, to become more involved in the diversity and inclusion effort. The firms hire directors of diversity and inclusion, but in many cases, they're not empowered to affect authentic change and hold managers and partners at various levels accountable to make those hiring decisions. So, you know, firm leadership and managing partners and executive committees have to roll up their sleeves and take an active role if they're serious about creating an inclusive culture. And that may also be confronting, like you said, bias and in some cases bigotry. You know, the legal profession has played an outside role in helping achieve civil rights, voting rights, social justice. But if you look inside their own house, you know, it needs a lot of work.
Right. I mean, we have politicians that are former lawyers that are seated right now who have beliefs that discriminate against one set or another of people. And it's impossible to sit in a seat and be completely objective when you have your own personal beliefs that may go against what objectively you should do. And everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a set of beliefs they grew up with. It's being able to manage through when maybe your beliefs are a little more narrow than they could be or should be, to recognize that and do something different about it. You know, what you said it resonates so much with me because I see it every day. Every day I have people that I went to school with, people that are friends of friends that refer them to me, and they say, I've been tapped to be the diversity, equity, inclusion director, vice president, et cetera, at my company. I have no experience doing it, but I'm Black. Like, that's pretty much the prerequisite. Are you a person of color? Be our DE&I expert. And it's the expertise where, you know, they struggle. And then if something doesn't go right, or if the program they put together fails for lack of attachment in the organization, well, we tried. And, you know, then it's a ding on them. Well, we gave you this opportunity and you didn't do well, so now you're going to get shuffled off into somewhere else. It is a self-fulfilling failure, you know? Right. And I'd struggle with this with a lot of companies, and a lot a lot of all types of entities, medical, legal, industrial, sales and marketing, all of them, where diversity and inclusion is seen as something for HR to do. You know, we're going to stick to the business. You guys do this woo-woo, feel good, friendly stuff on your own time after work, or Carol's in charge of it, you know, like that type of thing. And people feel removed from the process. And this is where I like to get into Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, where, you know, he talks about being anti-racist. It's either one or the other. Either you are racist or you can be anti-racist. But to say that you are agnostic or in the middle, or it's not your problem, if you're watching it happen and you're allowing it to happen, guess what? You are supporting it. And the only way to stop supporting it is to be anti that thing, anti-racist, anti-homophobic, anti-sexist, however you want to look at it. But just to think that, well, my favorite is when people say, you know, I never owned slaves. Well, yeah, I understand nobody alive actually did, but the systems put in place still affect us to this day. And if you say nothing about the systems that are part of that legacy, you're allowing the status quo to perpetuate and continue to oppress other people. So even though you technically haven't done anything wrong, you can still do something right. And that's the difference.
Yes, and I can't agree more. And while I applaud General Counsel Gayton for his effort in raising awareness and holding law firms accountable, in my opinion and my hope, that in the follow-up to his memo about hiring, he also requires these firms to set up allyship programs where attorneys in leadership, typically white men and women, sponsor and mentor the professional and career development of attorneys of color or attorneys from other underrepresented groups. You know, the LGBTQ community is impacted as well in their ability to advance into leadership of these law firms. I think where firms are stuck is that once they make a hire of a diversity candidate, they pat themselves on the back and think that's it, it's over. Yeah. You know, we did our job, we get the gold star, and then they, in many cases, that attorney is left isolated. They're not embraced, they're not welcomed, they're not sponsored or mentored. And I think allyship, more than anything else, should be coupled with the ambition and the motivation to increase the numbers of attorneys of color. Any thoughts there?
Absolutely. You know, I love what you said about, you know, hiring someone and thinking that you're done. That's just the beginning. And I like to compare the journey of inclusion in any organization to working out. You know, you've bought the bike. That's great. Get on the bike. You know, you have to work at it. It requires constant reinforcement. You know, I can diet for a week and lose like 3 pounds and go, yay, I can't start eating pizza the following week or fall back into old habits. Being an inclusive environment is a lifestyle change, just like being fit and working out and all these other things. And it's something that you do for the rest of your life. This is not something that you can fix in 8 months or a year or even 2 years and then go, okay, we fixed it. Now let's carry on with what we were doing, as if this is some encapsulated event. It's not a project. It is a process. And it needs to be a continual evolution of how you treat people. And it starts with every single person in your organization. Like everyone from the admin assistant to the gophers, the runners, the interns, the middle management, the senior partners, everybody has to have skin in this game. Everyone has to learn about their own biases, regardless of who they are, how they identify. Everyone has some sort of bias. It's just innate to who we are as humans. It's recognizing it and being able to control your responses that may potentially discriminate against someone else. That's the part that we all have to struggle with. And if we leave it just up to, you know, Barbara in HR, she can only do so much, you know, so we all have to take a part of it, and it has to be a perpetual thing.
Yeah, and I think for, you know, law firms or organizations who don't even know where to start, I think the work that you're doing and our colleague, Dr. Fritz Gillette, just facilitating that safe space dialogue, starting the conversation of you know, who we are, how we treat each other, how inclusive is this organization, having those difficult conversations and then building and incorporating programs from there.
It starts with that difficult conversation, then wake up call, the little
Mhm.
slap in the face, like, hey, guess what? You got work to do. And it starts right now. And then once people start to realize that they're not exempt from the work that needs to be done, then you can get on with the actual doing of the work. But when you have that resistance of, well, I haven't done anything wrong, I've never discriminated against anyone. Maybe you have, and you just didn't recognize it because it felt comfortable to you. I've been with a lot of different companies that will tell their recruiting team, look for people that you think would be a good fit. And on the surface, that sounds innocuous, but when your entire team is homogeneous, they look for people that fit with them, and they hire people that they would want to go hang out with or have a beer with. And that can tend to bring you a lot of candidates that look the same and overlook people. And then, 2 years later, well, we just can't find any good candidates. Well, look somewhere else,
I interviewed gentleman David Campbell, who's the chief operating officer of Optimal Networks in the DC area. And David said, if you're a leader of an organization and you look around and most people look like you have a problem. And there's so much research and study about how the most diverse teams are the most innovative, the most productive, the most efficient. So I think sometimes the legal profession has been a little behind the curve of corporate America in embracing training and development, but I think that's part of the winning formula here to increase numbers of diverse attorneys and attorneys of underrepresented groups, and create an environment and an inclusive environment where they can thrive, build a career, and become part of leadership.
Yeah. And I think the other side of it, when you talk about building an inclusive environment and diversity leading to innovation, improved efficiencies, et cetera, it doesn't feel like that at first because it can be awkward. It can be uncomfortable. But once you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, then you start to see things shoot, they skyrocket because now people are speaking their minds. They're giving you ideas that they wouldn't have given you before for fear of retribution, retaliation, ousting, etc. So they kept it to themselves, and it could have been the best idea ever that no one ever heard because the person that owned it was afraid to say it. And that's where you lose a lot of times when it comes to an inclusive environment. And this doesn't necessarily have to be just diverse candidates. It can be anyone. If your firm has fostered a culture of fear of the partners, unfortunately, then no one's going to speak up. And especially if you look different walking down the hall, you're not going to want to draw more attention to yourself. And ultimately, people who don't fit what is seen as it can be a perception based on what they see every day. If they see no other representation beyond themselves, they're going to start looking for somewhere where they may be more comfortable. How do you make people comfortable enough to stay where they are, to want to grow, to feel empowered to speak their truth, to speak their mind, to speak up in a room full of partners? Some people have that innate ability, but most people, it needs to be built on a level of trust. And they have to trust that if they say this, do this, act this way, it's not going to result in them being punished in some subtle, shuffling off to the side kind of way. So people, they are reluctant to share. If you can create an environment where there's a level of like psychological safety, where people feel like I can be myself, no matter what self looks like or sounds like or thinks, then you've got a recipe for a truly innovative, brand new, edgy firm, and that'll take you into the next century.
Well, Joy, thank you so much. Again, I love having these conversations with you. I can't wait for the next one. And hopefully, I hope to be part of the solution and make contributions and raise awareness around allyship and how important and impactful it is. And I know the great work that you do makes a big difference.
Just a little bit every day. If I can reach one person every day, I've done my job for the day. But then tomorrow you wake up, you do it again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.